أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Taqiyya is one of the most important Islamic concepts which is related to our beliefs and also to the way that we practice our faith. It is also one of the most misunderstood topics that exists within Islamic theology. So inshallah today we're going to briefly look at the definition of taqiyya, what is its meaning, what is the origin of this word. Then we'll look at some of the examples from the Holy Quran and from the ahadith about this important concept. And then finally we'll look at the different kinds and different types of taqiyya which exist. So firstly, the definition of the word taqiyya, which comes from the Arabic root word waqa'a or al-wiqaya, which means to protect or protection. So in reality, taqiyya is to do with protecting oneself, protecting one's life, protecting one's honor, their dignity, their wealth, their family, and above all, of course, protecting one's faith. And sometimes it is necessary for a person, when it comes to protecting one's faith, to conceal and to not make apparent their own faith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Holy Quran, talking about this particular example and this form of taqiyya, is mentioning in verse number 106 of Surah Al-Nahl. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم من كفر بالله من بعد إيمانه إلا من أكره وقلبه مطمئن بالإيمان. This is a famous verse of the Holy Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says those who disbelieve after having believed, except for those who are forced to do so whilst their heart is at satisfaction and at peace and tranquility because of their beliefs. Is mentioned, and this story and this tafsir reaches the state of tawatur, that mufassirin, commentators of the Holy Quran from all different schools of thought in Islam, are unanimous that the asbab al-nuzul, the reason of the revelation of this particular verse, was about Ammar ibn Yasir, radwanullah ta'ala alayh, who was forced to see the murder of his parents in front of him, and then was told by the people who murdered them that if he were not to leave Islam and leave the Prophet ﷺ, then he too would be murdered in that similar way. And he was forced to utter words to the effect that he had left Islam. And some people believed that Ammar had abandoned Islam. Yet when the story reached the Prophet ﷺ, he affirmed that Ammar was full of faith, and that monotheism, Tawheed, was within his heart. And when he came to the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet comforted him and advised him that, again, if he were in that situation, he could do so, and he could act in this way in order to save his life, his honor, and his dignity. Similarly, we see this example in another verse in the Holy Quran, in Surah 40, Surah Al-Mu'min, verse 28. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the believer from the time of the Pharaoh, who also concealed his faith and then chose to display it at a different time. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وقال رجل مؤمن من آل فرعون يكتم إيمانه أتقتلون رجلا أن يقول ربي الله وقد جاءكم بالبينات من ربكم. He said, the person who was a believer from the people of Pharaoh who had concealed his faith, that are you going to kill the person who says that my Lord is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So similarly, in this scenario, in this situation, we see the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises that person who concealed his faith in order to save himself, and then chose to display that faith at a later point where it was necessary to save the life of the Prophet of his time. Similarly, in the books of Rawayat, in the books of Hadith, we have many narrations which talk about this particular topic and the ways and the method in which a person is to practice taqiyya. Two of our great scholars from this current time, Ayatollah Al-Uzma, Sheikh Nasir Makarim Shirazi, Hafidhahullah Ta'ala alayh, and a great scholar from our times who recently passed away, Ayatollah Al-Uzma Sayyid Muhammad Sadiq Al-Ruhani, Rahmanullah Ta'ala alayh. Both of them mention in details regarding the ahadith that have been narrated on this particular topic. And they argue that they have been transmitted so frequently that they have reached the state of mutawatir and reliable. There are various different types and various wordings that have been mentioned in the hadith about this particular topic. For example, there are a number of hadith which talk about taqiyya as the shield and the protection of the believers. We have narrations which state that it is the basis and the necessity of faith that a person who has no taqiyya has no religion, man la taqiyya la, la dina la, has no faith whatsoever. And there are examples of other prophets who have practiced this in the past. Similarly, many other general principles have been mentioned in order to establish the legitimacy and the importance of this concept, that a person has to protect themselves from harm, protect themselves from all kinds of difficulties that they might have, and also certain obligations are lifted from a person as a result of being in difficulty. As we know, for example, that if a person is starving and they don't have access to any other food, or they're dying of thirst and they don't have access to anything other than that which is haram or najis, then they would have to use that in order to save their lives, because saving their life is a priority. One objection that's raised by some people is that taqiyya is like lying or hypocrisy. However, in reality, taqiyya is fundamentally different from lying and hypocrisy, because hypocrisy involves for a person to conceal their disbelief while pretending to hold belief. And